Hi everybody and welcome to our webinar today. It's a part of the EUA webinar series on greening in European higher education institutions. Today's webinar will be looking at university strategies and actions for environmental sustainability. It's chaired by me. My name is Alison Morris-Rowe and I'm a Policy and Project Officer at the European University Association. So first of all, a big welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping rules before we begin. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent to you after the webinar. The recording will be made available on EUA's YouTube channel. So anybody who registered for this webinar will receive a link to the recording. Now, some of you may not be familiar with this webinar tool, Big Marker, and so we just wanted to go through some of the ways that you can interact with us and with the presenters. So first of all, we have a chat function. So please feel free to post a greeting in the chat. You can also put any technical issues that you're having here or just share any other remarks. So I would invite you all to introduce yourselves by using this chat function. However, if you would like to ask our speakers any questions, please do so using the Q&A tab, as you can see just to the right of the chat tab. So here our team will monitor the questions and publish them. Once published, you can actually vote on the questions that you're most interested to hear the answer to. If you just click on the little thumbs up, so the question with the most votes will be pushed up to the top of the list. Now our presenters can also answer these questions. They might just type a response. So keep an eye out. You can have a look under the answered tab and you might see your question answered there. Now we also have some handouts for you. So if you just look to the right-hand side of polls, here you will find, for example, links to presentations, as well as some of our speakers' strategies on greening, as well as some interesting articles on this topic. So, who is joining us today? Well, first of all, we are joined by our very own Henriette Stober, who is a policy analyst at the European University Association. And Henriette is going to be talking us through some survey findings as we carried out a survey on greening in higher education institutions. Now, this survey is actually framing this webinar and, in fact, the entire webinar series. We're delighted as well to be joined by three other speakers. So we have Marianne Domézel from Marcel University in France, where she is the Vice President for Sustainable Development. Similarly, we have Tom Parrott from the University of Surrey in the UK, where he is the Head of Energy and Sustainability. We are also being joined by Meg Baker, also from the UK, who is the Interim Director of Education at the SOS Students for Sustainability Network. So we're delighted to have all of you here with us today. I hope Meg has managed to join us. I see that she's connecting there. That's fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to Henriette.
Thank you very much, Alison, for the introduction. I'm just waiting for the slides to come back up. Hello. Okay. I can do it myself too, I guess. Voila, here they are. Very good. Thank you so much. Okay, so as Alison mentioned, I will talk a bit about the findings of a survey that EUA has recently conducted. Oh, the slides are gone again. Sorry about that, but I'll just keep talking. Before I do so, I would just like to mention a couple of words on the European University Association itself. We are a membership association currently bringing together around 800 higher education institutions and some national university associations from the countries of the European higher education area. And as an organization, we bring together our members on topics that are of importance to them in form of events and workshops, such as the one today, in projects, but also we represent them in these topics towards the policy level. And therefore, I actually wanted to quickly start and give you some background and some policy links to the topic of greening, and also to frame why EUA has carried out this research piece. Now, even before running a survey on the topic of greening, we actually were aware that many of our member universities already were quite active in forward-thinking activities on environmental sustainability and greening. Based on this, we believe that they are well placed to be key actors in achieving the objectives of various policy agendas globally, for instance, the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and on the side of the EU, for instance, the European Green Deal. Now, in recognition of the potential role of the higher education sector, perhaps, we already see some policy links in various EU policy documents and also funding frameworks. So as an example, you can see here on the slide the 2020 communication on a European education area, which mentions the green transition as one of the goals for higher education. More linked to the funding programs that all have kicked off this year, we do see that the fight against climate change is one of the main priority areas in, for instance, the Erasmus Plus program, where besides seeing revision of the rules and regulations and funding for mobility, we will also see greening or environmental sustainability become one of the priority areas to be funded for the collaboration project actions. In addition, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions will about now publish a green charter that is to encourage or promote the sustainable implementation of research activities that are funded through this program. There's also tagging of specific funds under, for instance, the Horizon program or the EU's development assistance. In the latter, we know that a quarter of the EU's development assistance is to be spent on greening and environmental sustainability, and linking this back to the European education area communication and to the higher education sector. There we know that the green transition as a goal for higher education is set particularly with a focus on collaborating with the Eastern and Southern neighborhood and with Africa. Furthermore, there is an Education for Climate Coalition that is about to kick off. This is an activity of the European Commission that is supposed to be led by stakeholders from all education sectors. Here, it's going to be all about peer learning, co-creation, and those kind of things. But perhaps most importantly, there is a forthcoming Council recommendation on education for environmental sustainability. And this document will really set the broader aims and goals for the years to come in this field. As I said, it is currently under preparation, and there will actually be a public consultation running over the summer, or it's foreseen for the summer, perhaps the autumn. And we believe this is a really good opportunity to showcase the potential role of higher education in achieving goals of environmental sustainability. So I would very much like to encourage you, once this public consultation is live, to also participate on behalf of your university. EUA will, of course, also make sure that our universities have their say globally, and we will use the findings of the survey that we have carried out in the spring of this year as a basis for our response to the public consultation. You can see here on the slide the number of participants to our survey in the HEI. We had 305 responses in this area, but I must mention that we also opened the survey to responses from universities from the former Tempus countries. Overall, we received 390 responses, and there will be a separate evaluation for those countries that are outside of the EHEA. All of this will be published in more detail in autumn this year, so unfortunately we cannot share with you a link to a report at the moment, but we wanted to use the timeline of the EU's Green Week, which is currently also ongoing, to showcase some of the examples and some of the practices of the universities that have participated. Right. So looking at the sample from the EHEA, we found that universities are actually quite strategic in addressing the topic of environmental sustainability. 61 have a concrete strategy in place, either as part of an overarching strategy, as part of a strategy on sustainable development goals, or a dedicated greening strategy even. At 27% of the universities, this is currently under preparation. And when asked what policy links these strategies may have or how they are framed, it is quite clear that the SDGs are indeed the main driver of the university's strategic documents. You can see it here in the graph on the slide. But also in about 40% of the cases, national policies and national initiatives do play a big role. And as part of the report of the survey data in autumn, we will also issue a list of such national initiatives, networks, and policy frameworks. Of not as much importance, at least not at the moment, are European policies and initiatives, as well as the European Union Green Deal. Now, you can see here that 16% said that they linked the Green Deal specifically in their strategic documents. And to be honest, while this figure is very small, on the other hand, the Green Deal, of course, has only been published last year. So we think that this is actually already quite a big number of universities directly linking it to their strategic level. And we see, of course, potential to see this growing in the future. So why do higher education institutions engage in the topic of environmental sustainability? Here on the slide, you can see what they ranked as the most important factors or drivers of their work on greening or environmental sustainability. There was a long list of options, and to be honest, quite a lot of them, or most of them, did receive very high rankings, but these are the top 5. Very clearly here, we see that the work of universities in this field is driven by their institutional values and also by their third mission and their sense of a wider community as a societal actor. But what is also key is indeed engagement of all actors of the university. So not only leadership, but also student engagement and initiatives and staff engagement as well. And last but not least, I would just like to give you a couple of examples. And here we really have collected a lot of information and data. These are just, some very few of the examples of what is going on at the universities. In most cases, these activities take place across the entire university. 22% of the universities on average said that these activities are driven by individual faculties or departments. So in terms of concrete examples, perhaps the most obvious would be, first of all, recycling and waste management, where 68% of the universities say that they have comprehensive policies in place already, or depending on how you would look at it, perhaps one would expect to see more. But I must say the remaining 32% or so actually had at least some activities around recycling in place as well. Learning and teaching seems to be an area of high importance for the whole arena of environmental sustainability. And if you are very interested in this particular aspect, I would very much like to invite you to have a look at the recording of the webinar that we hosted yesterday, which was directly on learning and teaching and environmental sustainability. A lot of activities going on there, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. As for a concrete example, you can see here on the slide, in 61% of the participating universities, SDGs are actually considered in curriculum reform, and 21% said they also specifically consider greening or environmental sustainability. Perhaps not so surprising, digital tools and for teleworking, virtual mobility, teleconferencing, those kind of things are nowadays standard at 57% of the universities. And this is also expected to be growing even post-COVID era. In the area of research and development, just as an example, reducing the environmental footprint of laboratory research is set in 24% of universities in form of a comprehensive policy. And I would just like to also underline that partnerships with other higher education institutions in this field seem to be very crucial and dear to many of our universities. 64% actually have comprehensive policies on how these partnerships should benefit environmental sustainability at their university. And this is it from my side for now. I would like to hand back over to Alison.
Thank you very much for that really interesting presentation, Henriette, and to hear about the findings on a European level. So now we're going to hear about more of some national initiatives and strategies, so in France and the UK, but starting with France. So I'll ask our speaker, Marianne, to turn her camera on. And Marianne, we would really like to hear about your institutional approach to greening in Aix-Marseille, and also feel free to reflect on the data presented by Henriette. And to our audience, please post your questions in the Q&A section.
Yes, Thank you. Can you hear me? It's okay? Oh, okay. Hello to all. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for their invitation, and I want to excuse myself for my bad English accent. So let me present you the Organization of Sustainable Development at Aix-Marseille University and some action as examples. The organization in Aix-Marseille University in terms of sustainable development is on 3 levels. The first one, in dark blue, the political organization with the president, with the vice president of sustainable development, and 2 policy officers in charge of biodiversity policy and in charge of interdisciplinarity SDG policy, and a climate council chaired by the president of Aix-Marseille University and head by a dean of faculty. Policy can only be efficient if it is supported by an operational department, here presented here in orange. At Aix-Marseille University, we have 5 staff members. And of course, in a sustainable approach, it is essential to take stakeholders under consideration. This is why we have named ambassadors in each department and in each faculty. Their role is top-down and bottom-up. Twice a year, the Sustainable Development Orientation Committee is gathered to inform the community of the actions implemented and also to discuss new orientations. About 40 ambassadors, they were chosen, as I said, in their department by their department heads in the departments and faculties. The objectives are different. Participative approach, taking into account the stakeholders, creating a network, and contribution to the self-assessment. I will speak about it after. The Sustainable Development Roadmap of Aix-Marseille University is based on 4 action verbs: educate, engage, act, collaborate. In French, it's the SMAC. SMAC is like a kiss. This is an overarching strategy as Henriette presented before. Educating, it's reinforcing actions with the students and the staff. And then after we engage staff and students, continuing and developing engagement and also answering students' requests. For example, we have created an energy challenge. The objective was to reduce electricity consumption by about 3%. And then each month, a mascot explained why and how to reduce consumption according to different themes: digital, lift, air conditioning, for example. After act, it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing waste production, and using circular economy. For the gas greenhouse gas emission, we elaborate a mobility plan. We also work on a waste plan, and concerning circular economy, we work through public procurement. Finally, collaborate with local partners on the territory, the municipality, l'ADEME in France, the region council, and so on, some other partners, but collaboration also inside the university through, for example, the ambassadors. Concerning the national referential, it's a national tool which allows us to evaluate our policy. It's a specific tool for higher education in France. It's based on 5 levels, from awareness to wonderful actions. It's based on 5 axes: governance, learning, research, environmental management, local integration. 17 strategic variables are proposed. For example, reduce greenhouse gas, for example, sustainable development policy or student skill in sustainable development. And we have also 44 operational variables. If you look to reduce greenhouse gas, it's, for example, the mobility plan operational action, SD policy, it's planning, and student skill, it's students' actions. In order to monitor the effectiveness of the policy, some indicators have been chosen. They were chosen according to criteria, of course, in agreement with policy. And the second criteria is the indicators have to be easy to collect or available. 2 kinds of reports: government indicators. You can see all the indicators, and the other one is a social report, which is a legal requirement. And for this part, the indicators are linked to the SDG. Now I propose to present you 2 actions. AMU has obtained the label Agir Ensemble. It's a French label, and it consists to act collectively. You see the 3 levels: mobilize, create sustainable local territorial partnerships, and share resources. For 3 actions towards students and or staffs: reducing waste in the restaurants, in the student restaurants, organizing events, for example, Act Collectively Week, and also in the 3rd, students' commitment. And you can see down all our partners. And next, the second illustration is a bonus. According to the objective achieved, students can benefit from an extra 1.5 points on the overall average each semester. It's for all students from Bachelor 1 to Master 1. They can propose an event, preparation and organization, for example, creating a botanical trail, organizing a conference about the environmental impact of meat, and creating a shared garden. If they want, they can work on a bibliographic subject, for example, climate treaties and negotiation, or the impact of the oil spill in Mauritius in July 2020. And the evaluation endpoint, as you can see on the slide, on 3 levels. Okay, and the bonus point is you can see on the slide also. I think I have finished my presentation, and I want to thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That was really interesting, and I was very interested personally to hear about your energy challenge. That sounded really fun. We have lots.
Very funny.
Yes, good. We have lots of questions for you. In fact, a few questions for you in the Q&A, Marianne. So if you want, you can type some answers directly, but we will have a chance to answer some of those questions later during our discussion round. But next, I would like to move on to our presentation from Tom Parrott from the University of Surrey. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. Really pleased to be here to talk about some of the work the University of Surrey is doing on this. I'll start by saying that these drivers are probably no surprise to anyone attending this webinar today, but I did want to elaborate them a bit to talk about why the university is engaged in this way. So morally, we know that as a society and as businesses, we need to be doing more than we have done, and we need to do it sooner in order to meet the growing range of ecological and climate-based challenges that we are facing across the sustainability spectrum. That sits very prominently in our strategy and our vision for how we want to change the university moving into the future. Financially, though, of course, there are opportunities to reduce operational costs, reducing energy use, reducing water use. This will be the same for many of you. But there are also opportunities here to increase the potential success of grant applications, of research success, by aligning our research ambitions. So we as a university do some fantastic research into sustainability, urban living, and sustainability are core research strategies for the university. But we need to make sure that our operations on site are actually aligned to that, so we can build a strong case for applying for grant funding, because increasingly we are seeing grant funding asking a range of challenging questions about the university's own performance. So that's increasing. The other thing that we see is that donors are increasingly aligning their giving strategies to the Sustainable Development Goals. So positioning ourselves well to answer those questions from donors is going to place us in a better position to take advantage of that funding for research and potential projects on site. And anyone who's looking for some information or backing on that should head to a website, just simply Google SDG funders, where you can see, particularly for the UK alone, £3.4 billion worth of funding has been awarded over the last few years, since 2016. And you can see for your individual countries what that would be for you. Reputationally, this is of key importance. Now, a couple of years ago, a project by a student in my team, Nicola Reeg, surveyed the entire student population at the university. We got about 800 responses, which was very good. 82% of those students said that good sustainability credentials made a university a more attractive place to study. So whilst it's not the defining factor in where a student chooses to study, it is an indicator, we believe, of quality and something we need to take seriously. There are a growing number of rankings and assessments on university performance. The THE impact rankings, Times Higher Education impact rankings are one that I would draw attention to. The university has taken that very seriously as really a driver for increasing the embedding of the SDGs in its own operations and research practice, but also for actually driving forward a program of work that is seeing us aligned to those SDG questions that are asked in that application process, which has been really useful because they're asked about operations, you're asked about partnerships, you're asked about your own research. So it's actually in a way helped us to realize what we're good at. And there are also other rankings that are increasing scrutiny, like the People and Planet Green League, which focuses on university operations, and then even a ranking specific to universities' carbon targets, which are coming to the fore. But it's really important that we do show progress on this, not just from a sort of a reputation perspective, but also because we are educating the future leaders of business. So what we do and how we practice sustainability on site is going to prepare those for how they define the business priorities of the businesses they choose to join or choose to lead eventually. We have what I would call at the university a policy-led strategy. In the last 2 years, we've introduced or reviewed a number of our strategies, and we've aligned those to the SDGs. So always when these policies are going through the process of approval in our governance structures, we're asking, how do these policies impact on the SDGs? how can we make that impact or mitigate that impact through improving or enhancing the policies, and how can we make it clear that those policies are actually related to the SDGs? We have a governance structure that I'll talk about in a moment, which promotes closer working between student groups, academics, and professional service staff. All of those teams come together in those groups to participate and work on plans. And that's really important because we want to engender a sense of responsibility for the projects that we adopt and the policies we adopt, and not just give the impression that it is my team, the sustainability team, who deal with that at the university, because that is not going to affect successful cultural change. We need to give people a sense of responsibility if we do want the cultural fabric of an organization to change. And we're starting to embed the SDGs and sustainability in decision-making processes. So I've talked about policies, but even when it comes to certain faculties who are now including this in their, in whether or not they choose to apply for a certain grant, how does it link to the Sustainable Development Goals? We're seeing that in our Faculty of Health and Medical Sciences at the moment, and we're hoping that's something that we can promote to the rest of the faculties within the organisation. We look to the SDGs, as many of you clearly do from the survey results, from the following perspective. We look at our operational perspective. What are we doing on our own site to reduce our impact? One of the key things that we've done in 2020 is to announce a net zero carbon strategy and plan and target that would take the university to net zero carbon emissions by 2030 for a range of very tangible steps, including promoting on-site renewable generation, establishing green supply routes, and increasingly reducing our demand. On partnerships, we have a range of existing partnerships that we can use to influence and broaden impact, and we can work with those groups or establish new groups to extrapolate those learnings for societal benefit, both regionally, nationally, and internationally. And we'll talk about some of those groups in just a moment. Engagement is key, and I've spoken about that. Research and having these pillars of strategic importance and sustainability in urban living in the university helps to give that sense to the entire organisation that it is of real importance. And then curriculum, ensuring as a principle that all of our students understand that how their course impacts on sustainability and how such impacts can actually be mitigated or removed entirely. And that's an objective of the university. And so every course in the next 5 years will undergo a framework review and will have to incorporate sustainability. And that is on top of the Global Graduate Award that the university already has and is working on a number of other extracurricular training modules for students and staff. That piece of work is being led by Professor Angela Druckmann at the university. Quick look at our governance structure. So we have a report going from a granular level at the bottom. So we have a number of working groups in sustainability at the university that focus on different areas like transport, like emissions and carbon, and procurement, for example, sustainability in the curriculum, sustainability in research. And these are led by different heads, as you see there. That feeds in, and I should say all of those groups, as I've said before, have representation from students, professional service staff, and academics, and that's really key. They then lead into a more senior group called the Executive Sustainability Steering Group, which is chaired by an exec board member, Professor Graham Miller, who's the Executive Dean of FAS. And that then feeds into the executive board for any decision-making processes as well, and then on to council for larger decision-making processes. So this governance structure is really helping us to accelerate progress at the university. So as mentioned by Alison earlier and Henriette, universities are really societal actors, and how do we actually disseminate this knowledge that we have and use it for greater societal benefit? Well, the university has been working and established in the last couple of years several groups and is working inside other groups to make this happen. So the Surrey Energy Partnership, which was born out of the university's Living Lab initiative, which is a key initiative at the university linked to the urban living pillar, has been run by Dr. Chris Jones and Professor Ravi Silva, and is chaired by Kat Reeby at the university, and it includes the county council, the enterprise and local enterprise partnership, which channels funding from the government, large-scale businesses like SSE Enterprises and Thamesway Group. And this brings these collaborators together to actually deliver projects in action on this regional and national scale. The Surrey Climate Commission, which was set up in part by Professor Richard Murphy and Ian Christie at the university, is a founding member, of which we're founding members, of course, is something that has had real benefits to Surrey County Council regionally. We have, for example, completed a piece of work that's looked at the actual carbon footprint of Surrey County Council and has enabled them to kind of move forward with a program to reduce emissions. And then internationally, we're part of the university's global partnership network as a co-founding member and permanent secretariat. And the UGPN supported 64 projects, 300 staff and 100 students covering a range of sustainability-based topics, including carbon economies, bio nano interfaces, and international trade. So some real far-reaching research, and I don't have time to mention anything else that the university is involved in, but there is plenty more we are doing to sort of disseminate the learnings that we have on our site out to these others. And we really feel like having a strong case operationally and academically is giving us a good platform to communicate from on these subjects. So I shall end there. And that's provided a very high-level overview, I think, of our greening activities and ongoing efforts. Happy to talk in more detail, to answer questions in the chat. And thanks once again for having me here today.
Thanks very much, Tom, for that really interesting presentation. And it's really interesting to see that sustainability and greening are being embedded in so many different disciplines in your university. That's really encouraging to see. So yes, there are some questions waiting for you in the chat, so I would invite you to respond to as many as you can. I see that Marianne is typing away there. Thank you, Marianne. Thanks to both of you for those really interesting presentations on what's happening in your institutions. So we're going to hand the floor back to Henriette then, who is going to present some more data on the survey for us. So this time talking about governance, implementation, and drivers. So over to you, Henriette.
Thank you very much, Alison, and also thanks to Tom and Marianne for presenting what is going on at their higher education institutions. It looks like it's nighttime here all of a sudden. I hope I won't cut out because there's a storm outside, but I will be brief anyway because quite a number of the things that are basically presented here in form of data on the slide have already been mentioned by the two previous speakers in terms of governance and engagement. You've seen the examples from the University of Surrey and University of Aix-Marseille on how they, how they govern and implement those activities and the strategy at their institution. And here on the slide, you can see the average for the HEI, and we did find that at over half of the institutions, central leadership does play an important role in the day-to-day implementation, which kind of underlines also the high importance of this topic on the central agenda of the university. We see more than a third of universities having a specific portfolio in the leadership team, such as the role, for instance, of Marianne at Aix-Marseille University, so Vice President or Dean for Sustainable Development or even for Environmental Sustainability. And then there are indeed specific committees, central offices and teams in various combinations, as we also saw in the two previous examples. And I just wanted to point out here that in the letter too, very often students are involved. If I could remind you of what I had said under drivers before, we already said that 58% found it very important that student engagement in initiatives are a driving force behind the university's activities in this field. But more so, 42% of universities said that partnerships with student groups and student organizations are set in comprehensive policies, so as part of their planning when developing and implementing their strategies and actions in this field. Back to Alison.
Thanks for that, Henriette. Yes, and as you said, the role of students is really crucial, and it's fantastic that we're now being joined by a representative from an international student organization that specifically works on greening. We're delighted to have Meg with us here today. Hopefully everything's working well. Yeah, we can see Meg. Brilliant. So Meg, I know that you have a presentation for us, and we're really looking forward to hearing about what your institution organization does. And I know you've carried out research on this very recently, and we'd be really interested to hear about some data that you have and if it aligns with our data. So over to you, Meg.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really great to have student voice in this space. So I'm not a student, but our organisation represents students. So I'm the Interim Director of Education at Students Organising for Sustainability UK, and I'll explain a little bit more about who we are as an organisation. So, I'll just move my mouse so that you can see the slide properly. So SOS UK is a charity launched in October 2019. We're part of the National Union of Students family, which constitutes 550 students' unions across the whole of the UK, representing 7 million students. We engage, inspire, and empower students to lead on sustainability. And through our work, we aim to deliver on our core mission, which comprises of 3 main strands. So the first strand is to get more students leading on and learning about sustainability, to embed sustainability in formal education from early years all the way through to adult learning, and to make sustainability more inclusive for everyone. Through data that we've carried out in the UK, we found that the environmental sustainability sector is the second least diverse sector in the UK as an industry sector. It comes second to agriculture. And through embedding sustainability in the curriculum and through providing students with experiences where they realise their potential to create impact for sustainability, we hope to change that and to make sustainability more inclusive by the way in which we also engage students through a whole variety of different initiatives that we lead on and engage students with. We're part of the umbrella organisation, Students Organising for Sustainability International, and we're one of the co-founders of SOS International. So I'll be sharing data from our international surveys of students, as well as that from our UK specific data. So the UK data is longer standing. We've been carrying out these surveys for the last 10 years, whereas the SOS International data covers the last 3 years, but it still provides some sort of longitudinal understanding of student perspectives and student demand for sustainability in higher education. So understanding this, I apologise for some of this not being completely European context, but some of it is, so it's a bit of a mixture. So at a UK level, we've been tracking, we've got a climate change tracker where we've been asking students how concerned they are about climate change since 2014. And in October 2020, that the level of concern amongst students saying that they're fairly or very concerned about climate change rose up to 90% of all students in the UK who responded to that survey. And we had around 5,000 students responding to that question. So really interesting and useful data to have. And it's important to recognise the role of higher education to turn that concern from potentially leading to students developing eco-anxiety, where they feel like they can't make a difference, to create change and address the climate crisis. The idea is that by knowing this data, we then share it with education institutions and support them to be able to make the change happen, and how they support students to become agents for change, to deliver on addressing the climate crisis in a really meaningful way. So we've been asking students in relation to that question what they think the role is of higher education and actually further education, because it's a tertiary education survey, what they think the role is of their education institutions to support them or to deliver on sustainable development and take action for sustainable development. So this is really useful maybe in the context of hearing about the overarching strategies from the previous presenters. And we found that 92% of students internationally, so from our international survey, which had 7,000 respondents, these students were saying that their place of study should actively incorporate and promote sustainable development. So it's been awesome to hear from some previous examples of the other presenters where they're demonstrating that this is something that they are doing and that they're actioning through various strategies and approaches. In terms of student experience of this within their curriculum, from the international survey, 40% of students reported low or no coverage of sustainable development in their course curriculum. And then kind of linking together with this, we asked a question of, in relation to the concern about climate change question, we asked students where they would go to seek information about climate change. So from this, we found that 76% of students would search online for that information, with only 24% trying to seek this information from teachers or educators, which suggests potentially, one, that people have a very high level of access to things like the internet on their mobile phones, but also maybe they don't feel like this is something that their educators will have the expertise in. But I can't guarantee that. That's just an interpretation of the data. Okay, so I've just got a slide here with some more data. I was informed that we'd have quite a high level of France and UK attendees at this event. So I've broken it down and got the France and UK specific data. And I found it quite interesting looking at the similarities and contrasts. And as you can see from here, 96% of students in France were saying that they agree that their place of study should actively incorporate and promote sustainable development. And just a few less, so 91%, said this from UK perspective. And then in terms of students thinking that saying that they would like to see sustainable development actively incorporated and promoted through all courses, so not just in like niche subject areas, it was 83% of students in both France and the UK. And then likewise, there was actually quite a big contrast between the percentage of students who would like to learn more about sustainable development between France and the UK, with 85% of students in France saying that this is something they would like to learn more about, versus only 65% of students in the UK. So whether that means that students think they already know enough or that they are not interested in knowing more, I'm uncertain, because we don't have the breakdown of the qualitative data on that. But we asked students why they would like to learn more about sustainable development, or why they would like to learn about sustainable development. And most of the reasons were about it being relevant to their future career choices, and because they recognize their roles as global citizens, and they want to be able to contribute for the betterment of society and the betterment of their planet. So they see it as their responsibility to make a difference and contribute. So hopefully universities can support students to be equipped in that way. The final set of data that I'm sharing here, which I find useful, and the rationale for having all of this data is that data drives change in a lot of contexts. And so both nationally and at an institution level, like the data that Thomas was sharing, it's been a really useful driving force for institutions trying to make change within what they're providing their students in terms of student experience for like developing sustainability competencies and understanding. So the previous slide was student expectations of their universities and their demand for what they think their universities should be doing and should be providing them with through their courses. And then on this slide here, we've now got a breakdown of what students are saying that they're experiencing within their universities. So what actually is happening on the ground. And this is quite an interesting one. So in France, the first question, we've got the same question above and below. So 64% of French students say that their university or college takes enough action to limit the negative impact it has on the environment and society. And then on the contrast, 79% of students in the UK agree that their university or college takes action to limit the negative impact it has on the environment and society. I don't think there's any, I don't want to compare this as better or worse, because in some of these questions, there's one scores higher or like better than another, but then you'll have another question where it's about how it's been embedded in courses. Or this final one here, we've got students say 71% of French students say that university is the place they've studied that's encouraged them to think and act to help the environment and other people the most. And then in contrast to that, 36% of UK students say that university is the place they've studied that's encouraged them to think and act to help the environment and other people the most. So a lot less students are saying that the university experience has had the biggest impact for them than French students. And whereas in contrast, a significant more students are saying that in the UK are saying that their university or college takes action to limit the negative impact it has on the environment and society. And then we've got one more kind of similar question, but not exactly the same, is that 66% of French students agree that their studies, so their course, what they're learning through their formal education experience, is helping them learn how to make changes to their lifestyle to help the environment. And then quite a similar percentage, 70% of students agree that being a student at their university or college encourages them to think and act to help the environment and other people. The difference between those two in the middle is that the question for the UK students could be interpreted as just like generally being a student at that university. So it could be through the informal curriculum, so things like activities that their students' union puts on and things that happen outside of their formal studies may still be like the contributing factors that they feel are helping them to think and act to help the environment and other people. Whereas the question for the international survey with the French data, it seems more specifically related to course content and what students learn in the formal curriculum. So what are we doing at SOS UK to try and create change? We try to embed sustainability. I've kind of touched on this already, but try to support students to have the skills and competencies to deliver on a more sustainable world by working with universities and students' unions and providing spaces for students to be platformed as the leaders in these spaces, by embedding it in the curriculum through like formal learning in the campus, so that students get that subliminal learning experience, so it's part of the culture that they develop whilst they're at university, and also through the community experience that they have whilst they're like learning from others and from their peers. I'm nearly done with my slides. So through SOS UK and SOS International, we've engaged a huge number of students through like engaging educators in trialing embedding sustainability in teaching and learning, which then inspires students to realize how sustainability is relevant to their learning experience, and it empowers them to want to go on to make change in the context of their curriculum. We run a whole institution approach through Responsible Futures, where it supports institutions to embed sustainability learning in strategies, in teaching and learning strategies, as well as their overarching strategic plans, so that it's not seen as a fringe subject, it's seen as something that should be a golden thread throughout the entire learning experience for students in their universities. But we also run various campaigns, so we're working with students across the whole of the education sector to try and get skills and competencies for addressing the climate crisis embedded in student learning from early years all the way through to adult education within the Teach the Future campaign. We run various engagement initiatives where students get trained to audit their institutions, so that students are empowered to then also feed back to staff at their institutions on the recommendations that they provide them as an outcome from the audits. Various different campaigns and learning opportunities where students take a lead on it through the training that we provide the students to be able to go ahead and be the leaders in that space. Thank you. I hope I didn't run over too much.
Don't worry, Meg. It was really interesting. Thanks a million for that presentation, and also for providing us with so much data from France and the UK. I'm sure Tom and Marianne are interested to learn about that data. I was personally quite shocked to see, that so many students have become so worried about climate change recently. And I suppose I'm not surprised in a way, but it's definitely something that is becoming, so topical and really timely. So thanks a million. There is a question or two for you in the Q&A, Meg, so I would invite you to answer it there. And we will be discussing more questions very shortly. So we're going to now move on to our discussion rounds, and the first one will be on the expected impact of greening activities. And just to frame this discussion round, we're going to have some data from Henriette.
Indeed, if I could quote Meg again, data hopefully does drive change. So I will just present a few more data from our greening surveys very briefly on the expected impact. So we did find that quite a number of universities, of course, monitor their activities, as presented also by Marianne and Tom earlier on. And so in terms of their findings on monitoring or the impact, we actually saw the feedback as quite a mixed bag, as you can see here as well on the slide. So we often saw the split between a third each with regards to strong impact already. There has been some impact, or no, there's no impact yet, but we really expect that something will happen in this field in the future. So just to give you 2-3 examples here, we do see already strong impact in terms of improving the quality of life in campus, or building reputation as a leader through example. But expectations are especially high in areas more further down to the bottom of the graph, for instance, making the institutions more attractive and helping recruit staff and students, or economic benefits, because many institutions also said it's not all about greening. They linked this very clearly to efficiency and cost saving as well. Back to you, Alison.
Thanks a million for that, Henriette. Now I would actually invite our 3 other speakers to turn on their cameras, as we would like to involve you all in this discussion. So Tom, your camera's on first, and we've got Meg as well there. And Marianne, you can turn your camera on as well. So just in relation to what Henriette has presented there, would you like to reflect on that and just tell us a little bit about what the main area of impact has been for you, first of all? There's also a question in the chat here from one of our audience members saying, how do we make the students understand the importance of sustainability and its impact? And also, how do we manage to make university presidents take this topic seriously? There are so many other challenges that higher education institutions face, especially during this pandemic. So over to you, whoever would like to come in first. Tom, off you go.
Thanks, Alison. So I think the first thing on student engagement is you need much closer links with the Students' Union. We engage very closely with the president of the Students' Union, and there is actually a team. We're lucky enough to have a team within the union, which is the community team, who are responsible for sort of environment and sustainability. So at the outset of each academic year, we've worked very closely with them. But that's not the be-all end-all, because student engagement is really difficult, and you actually have to engage with a really wide variety of different groups, and it's not just the ones who are already engaged, like Extinction Rebellion, People and Planet. It's actually so what we have in halls of residence is an engagement program when students arrive, which is actually something that's run with the University of East London on called Reduce the Juice, where effectively there are a range of sort of competitions throughout the year for halls of residence where students are able to engage, see what their impact is in terms of energy and water and things like sort of clothing and fast fashion. And when the pandemic hit, we sort of changed that slightly and ran a series of webinars with them throughout the year and invited some Surrey academics, amongst others, to attend those. So it's just one method of keeping that engagement going, I think. And the other key piece of that is you just have to engage on all types of media. We've started our own social media accounts and sustainability to try and engage people. We have started to sort of run programs trying to get around to all the different societies through the student union to talk to them and understand their impact. It's challenging. It is really challenging. It's something that requires a lot of resource and strategy to do.
Thanks a million, Tom, for that. Would Meg or Marianne like to come in? Or Henriette? Meg, yeah, please.
So can I just get a reframing of the question? Because from how Thomas responded, I was like, I'm not certain if I had the question right.
My apologies, I kind of asked 2 questions. So first of all, I just wanted to know a little bit about the main impact so far that has been witnessed or observed at your institutions, or institutions more generally, for you, Meg? And also there was a question in the chat a little bit about how you make students understand the importance of sustainability and its impact.
Okay, so like multiple factors have happened here. I guess that in terms of seeing change happen, lots has happened in terms of media coverage of like raising awareness around sustainability. So interestingly, it was in 2017 when David Attenborough on Blue Planet did a lot of coverage on plastic pollution in the oceans, and we found that through our student engagement work, students were really, really interested in like eliminating plastic, which is really important. But there's lots of really important ways of addressing sustainability and taking action around the climate crisis and the ecological emergency. So then again, like seeing like increased like coverage of the media around Extinction Rebellion as well. All of that, I think, has contributed to a rise in student concern around the climate crisis. And therefore, with universities seeing that data rising, then there's a bit of a reaction of finally senior leaders within universities are saying, oh, okay, we realize this is actually really important now. Because when I first started working in the sector, there was definitely, it felt like a hard game to play, to like try and persuade people that this was something really important, that they need to have an institutional agenda to be embedded like at a whole institution level, that certain academics would maybe think that it wasn't relevant to them. So it's not their discipline, whereas sustainability isn't a discipline. It's something that everybody needs to be addressing and everybody needs to be taking action for. And although not everybody is on board with this yet, there's definitely been an increase in how much people are engaging with sustainability because they realize that we need to act with urgency. And I think that there's lots of factors that have contributed towards that. But I do think a lot of it is about rising demand from students, because student demand is a big factor. It drives student numbers, and institutions and universities care about student numbers because they need it for them to survive. So that's a major factor. And then in terms of students caring about this and like learning about sustainability and learning how to take action, I think the most meaningful way for students to engage is for them to have opportunities where they can realize the difference that they can make through whatever role that they're playing. So whether it's that we're training students to be auditors, to audit teams through a green impact program, to identify like behavior changes that teams within universities have made, or whether it's students auditing a whole institution approach to identify how sustainability is being embedded in teaching and learning, students are then really inspired to see how much has happened that they don't realize that's happening behind closed doors. And then they feel empowered because they realize that they've actually carried out this audit which impacts whether the university gets accreditation or not. And that's a really big thing. I also think that the Times Higher Education Sustainable Development Impact Ranking, that's a factor because it means that sustainable development goals are being covered at like a really well recognized ranking system. Like whatever people think of benchmarking and rankings, I'm not a massive fan of them, but it does create a higher level of recognition of the importance of it.
Thanks a million for that, Meg. Marianne, I see you turning on your microphone.
Yes. Pardon. I think the first impact was to create a link between students and staff and around sustainable values. Of course, also about environmental impact, for example, with energy challenge, for example, and we decrease CO2 emissions. The link between staff and students help all of them to raise awareness and in the field of work and personal life also. Of course, some action are also performed, waste, energy, mobility, etc. Concerning the future, We go further actions, for example, renewable energies, better waste sort, decrease the use of driving alone, and so on, some actions. But I think the biggest challenge is to introduce an obligatory course for all students about sustainable development. And this is the most difficult, to convince colleagues to introduce sustainable development courses in the license, bachelor, etc. Presently, a working group works on this subject to progress about 30 hours on courses based on SDG. And the formation will be, I hope, obligatory for all students in the second year of bachelor's degree. 2 faculties will be chosen as an experimental school. And we work also on the third year's bachelor degrees to propose an operational course that links SDG to the discipline. For example, environmental impact of digital technology for students in mathematics and computer science. And I think this is the biggest challenge for the year.
Thanks a million, Marianne. Henriette, would you like to come in?
I think we can go on with the Q&A questions, as I see so many interesting there, and we're already kind of over time, but I will comment in. Thank you.
Problem. There are a few questions which have been asked kind of several times, and I think they concern all of our speakers, but maybe particularly just Tom and Marianne for this one. So some of our audience members are wondering about the strategy process itself. How long did it take? And do you have any tips, for example, for institutions who wish to create a greening strategy for the first time? And Meg, if you have anything to add, please do so as well. Tom, yeah, please.
Apologies, I thought Marianne was going to start there. So I think for us, the first thing to say is this process isn't finished, and it will be ongoing, and it's iterative, and it needs to be reviewed every year to make sure it's current. So you never really conclude this. I think the first thing you need to do is get a senior level stakeholder. So I think preferably someone on the executive board who can be given responsibility for sustainability for the institution. I think it's important that you have that level to the executive board. I think the other thing is that you need a governance structure. You need to involve people. The more people you can involve in the institution, the better, really, because that's the way to instigate cultural change. And that needs to include, as I've said before several times, but I do think it's really important that those groups include students and they do include staff, because that's how you're going to get your engagement. So simple steps like that doesn't actually cost a lot to do in the first instance. There will come a time when you want to do projects that do require certain resource and funding, and that can then be looked at, because there are a range of options for how you fund certain projects. But I think in the first instance, get a governance process in place. Start looking at what your biggest impact areas are. There have been a number of questions today in the chat about supplier emissions, and which are scope-free emissions. That's a huge impact area for universities. So one of the first groups you might actually set up is the sort of procurement group that looks at where the institution's spending money, who the big suppliers are, and what those suppliers actually are doing on greening. Not just from an environmental perspective and their product carbon intensity, like ICT suppliers, but also on their supply chains and how they're auditing supply chains. So there's a carbon factor there, but there's also a risk factor for the university, because if you're dealing with suppliers who aren't familiar with their supply chains and don't audit their supply chains, that's a risk. So actually, that's one way in which you can convince senior management from a risk perspective to implement this sort of governance structure and to start taking these issues seriously and to start highlighting areas like procurement to get started on sustainability. So that would be my advice.
That's great advice, Tom. Thanks a million. Marianne, what about you? What advice would you give institutions who want to develop a strategy for the first time on greening?
Excuse me, my sound is very bad, and with English it's difficult. Can you tell me in French?
Ah, ok. Donc, une université qui souhaite élaborer, par exemple, une stratégie pour la première fois sur le développement durable, qu'est-ce qu'elle pourrait faire en fait?
Yes, okay. Excuse me. I think the first is to convince the president to have a real and unfailing commitment of the leader and the president, and I think this is the first step. If they want, I think you can work with all the stakeholders to elaborate the strategy, because if you know what is sustainable development, but you don't know what are the energy problems, and you don't know what are the teaching problems, even if you are a teacher. So I think you have to take into account all the partnership inside the university, and to work. This is how we developed the first actions, and to have some meeting with all the staff and all the students, and moreover, this allow you to create a network. And I think creating a network contribute to convince the leader or the president if he or maybe she is not convincing. So I think you have to start with the head, but also with the down, and to compress that, and to start by other ways. Also, I think little steps method. You work with the partnership inside want to work with you, and so you can identify your first challenges. So the first challenges will be success, and so it creates energy, positive energy.
Thank you so much for that, Marianne. Meg, would you like to come in there?
I completely agree with what Thomas and Marianne said about the importance of engaging stakeholders. I guess my advice would just be to ensure that all stakeholders are engaged from across the whole breadth of the institution and outside the institution. So bringing in external partners who work closely with the university would be absolutely essential to ensure buy-in. So it's one thing creating a strategy, but you need to ensure that that strategy is going to be delivered on. And to ensure that it gets delivered on, you need to ensure that people are bought into it at the development stage so that they have co-produced it. And likewise, having that student voice included, that can be from the students' union, but also having some sort of student representation beyond the student union can be really powerful to show that students want this throughout the development of the strategy, and ensure that there's time-bound targets incorporated into it or attached to it, so that it doesn't just seem like greenwashing, so that it's demonstrating that it's something that's going to be really meaningful and create an actual impact.
Thanks a million, Meg. And I just have one final question, which was actually the question which received the most votes. And you've already kind of slightly answered it, but it's just if you want to add anything here. You've all spoken about convincing leadership, about, having buy-in from the whole institution for this strategy to work. But, the university faces so many challenges, and, especially during a crisis where maybe the climate crisis or the COVID crisis, for example, at the moment, maybe that has an impact on universities who feel that they just can't take this seriously at the moment, for example. So how do we tackle that? That would be my last question. And Henriette, I see you have your hand up. Oh, sorry. Will you just check? Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I thought Henriette was putting a hand up.
No, thanks, Alison. I might as well start, and I just want to also agree to the previous points on the previous question. Indeed, collaboration inside and out the university is key. The data really supports that also, that we have collected from those 300 universities. But on the question of how to persuade the university or university leadership, I really thought that was a great question, and it came right at the beginning too. The data situation here is clear as well, and I would invite you to use EUA data to convince your leadership as well. It's not only about greening or environmental sustainability in principle, or because it's something that you think belongs to a university value. Indeed, there's also, in terms of impact or expected impacts, there will be a very large number of benefits from efficiency and cost savings across several areas. And we heard energy referenced a lot today, but also about, perhaps receiving additional EU funding. I mentioned a couple of funding frameworks and policy areas, perhaps even receiving additional national support. In some of the countries, there are indeed national initiatives in place. And I think it was mentioned by several of our speakers today to also do what your students ask you to do. So we very clearly saw that this is in a high interest of students, that the university is engaged in the data that Meg has presented. Thomas also showed us some data from the University of Surrey, which confirms this. And we did see that many universities in EUA sample expect that by doing these kind of activities, it will also enhance their student and staff recruitment in the long run.
Thanks a million, Henriette. I'm not sure if Tom or Marianne or Meg have any last words of wisdom about how we take this seriously.
Well, can I just returning to that question that you asked a moment ago, Alison, I'll just make 4 quick points on this. I mean, in any institution's recovery from this pandemic, financial savings are important, and there still exists significant opportunity to reduce operational costs through sustainability, and I'm thinking energy and water use in particular there. Those have always been drivers, and those remain after this, so we shouldn't just look at it as something that costs more. It may cost something, but it will deliver long-term savings, because energy prices are only going in one direction. Student recruitment has got to be an important part of that equation for a university recovering from the pandemic, and we've seen significant amounts of data today on student perception and how that's changed over a short period of time. This is going to become more important to students, so I don't think it's completely unreasonable that students will start looking at green credentials at universities, and will start making close choices between 2 institutions based on their reputation and what they're doing. And finally, I'd say that inaction will result in pressure from students. And I can speak with first-hand experience about the sort of things that we've seen when I turned up at the institution in 2019, and we've done some fantastic work with students and groups to turn that around in the meantime. I'm being very candid with you when I talk about that. But finally, I just say, if it's not serious now in terms of everything that's going on morally, then when is it going to be serious? And I'll just leave it at that, perhaps.
Yes, I don't think I could put it any better myself, Tom. So I think we might call it a day there. I can't see any other hands up to answer. And just a big thank you to all our speakers for attending the webinar today and for your presentations. Thank you so much for answering all the questions in the chat. A big thanks to all the audience members for posing all those questions and for taking such an interest in this webinar. So just before I leave you all, I'd like to remind you that this is actually a 3-part webinar series with 2 other webinars that took place earlier on in the week, and the recordings are on our YouTube channel. I'm not sure if we can put the presentation back up so we can show that slide with the previous webinars. Thank you very much. Yeah, so we had 2 webinars earlier this week, as you can see from the slide, and the recordings are already available on our YouTube channel, as well as today's recording, which will shortly be posted. We also have another webinar taking place next week on the 8th of June as a part of a different webinar series on universities and the future of scholarly publishing. So we'd love to see you there if you're free. So many thanks again for attending, and have a lovely weekend.